Welcome to the School Library Research Informing Practice podcast. I'm Dr. Brenda Boyer, a lecturer with the Department of Library Science at Rutgers University School of Communication and Information. And I'm here with our Dr. Joyce Valenza, also a member of our department. Today, we're really excited to bring a recent graduate of our program, Alyssa Rivera, to the podcast. Alyssa has been a researcher in our Beverly E. Schoen Research Fellowship. The goal of the Schoen Fellowship is to build a culture of student research, professionalism, leadership, contribution, and innovation among our Masters of Information School Library concentration students. They do this through action research projects that relate to dynamic student learning in school libraries. And I'm so excited to talk with Alyssa today and have her tell us all about her project, which related to a major topic, and that is equity. So welcome, Alyssa. We're so glad to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So let's kick it right off. If you could tell us a little bit about what brought you to the topic of equity and how you began this project to begin with.
Sure. So my name is Alyssa Rivera. So I am a Hispanic person, and that is something that has really been very important to me. I've been trying to get more in touch with my culture throughout the years. But growing up, I really didn't have a lot of representation as I grew up in a predominantly white school district. And so because of this, much of my librarianship career so far in both academic and in future practice very soon, I have really focused on those ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so while I was brainstorming topics for my research project, I knew that that's what I wanted to focus on. However, while I was looking through the research, I realized there was a lot to do with diversity already. As you know, it's kind of been a hot topic, I guess you could say, in education. So I decided to veer more into the equity part, which is a big word, but that is what I landed on, calling my project Bridging Gaps in Equity.
Can you tell us how you arrived at a definition of equity? Because I know that was a
yeah. Yes, so that was something that took a lot of time. Like I said, equity is a very big word. So what I tried to do was look through all different types of educational research that had to do with equity and diversity and see how they would define equity for them. And so looking through journal articles and dissertations and other research projects just to see how they'd approached it informed me on how I wanted to approach it for school libraries specifically. Because, you know, how can you supply resources about monetary gaps? How can you provide assistance for representation without knowing, you know, what equity is for this research project? So I developed my own definition based on others' definitions, just to help me guide myself throughout this research project.
And Alyssa, can you paraphrase or tell us how you defined it?
Sure, I actually have it written down, so let me pull it out so I can read it word for word. All right, so to quote myself, providing equity to all students requires us as school librarians to continuously respond to current conditions in an effort to remove historic barriers and foster an environment where each student has access to the necessary resources and are given the opportunity to learn, grow, and meet their potential. As educators, we must recognize any existing biases and overcome them as best we can in order to provide full service to every last student, whether they be a middle-class student, a refugee, an English language learner, and every student in between.
That's great. And I know every time I read that your definition, what strikes me is that it's a continuing responsibility and a continual response to the conditions of the times, that this isn't a static sort of definition, that it's very flexible and iterative and growing. And that was something I really liked about the definition. Dr. Valenza, did you have any questions?
No, I think it's wonderful that you operationalized the word before you started engaging in your research as the research informed you about it. And that there's a recognition that equity is not the same thing as equality or some of the other words that we associate with it, because it's responsive to the needs of the young people around you. So
yes.
Thank you for that.
So, Alyssa, tell us a little bit more about, we sort of know your purposes of the research. What were the goals that you set out with such a massive topic? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I definitely needed to narrow it down a little bit into more digestible pieces, not just for myself, but for the people that will be looking at the research I've done. So in the end, my goal was just to create a LibGuide that school librarians could use to promote diversity and provide resources to them, or for them to share with others to better close those gaps in equity in their communities. So the areas that I really focused on were monetary gaps, representation gaps, and access gaps. And looking at those three things allowed me to narrow my research into something where, you know, it wasn't too broad for people to understand or too broad for me to research, but still enough that it could be a jump point for other school librarians.
I know when you were doing your research, you were into these specific areas of equity. You were surprised that there was some gaps in the research. Can you talk about that just a bit?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that really surprised me the most was that there really weren't a lot of resources for monetary gaps. So I was able to compile a list of grants and awards for school librarians to apply to, and most of them were national education, broad education. So there weren't as many for librarians specifically, and there really weren't very many for New Jersey school librarians specifically. And so that was a road bump that I experienced that honestly I couldn't really find a way around, because, you know, I can't make my own grant for people to apply to, at least not right now. So I think that's something that definitely can be looked at by, you know, the people who have the power to do those sort of things. And I think, you know, that really surprised me, because school libraries historically haven't been very well funded. So I expected that there would be a lot more available from, I guess, from companies and organizations that find us to be more valuable and want to help us in that way. So that was kind of surprising to me to find that there weren't that many.
And can you talk about, so you structured your product, which was the LibGuide, and with these various breakdowns. Can you tell us just a little bit about what you've provided on each of those pages? And then we're, of course, going to provide the link to your guide as well at the end.
Yeah, sure. So I have them broken up into the monetary, representation, and access pages. So on the monetary page, I created a list that I am able to update since it's embedded through Google Docs. So I have grants, I have awards, I have scholarships, and then I have other resources for school librarians to look at for funding purposes. So that could be a Twitter feed, it could be a blog. And then I also have some books that can be referenced as well for purchase through the ALA website. In representation, I think this was a little difficult for me just to not fall into, I guess, the stereotype of looking for diverse books and that being the only thing that's there. So I looked more into diversity audits. So I have a whole section on there, how to start. I have templates and other tools that school librarians can use to do their own diversity audit, make it a little bit more digestible because it is a big project. And then I have smaller resources like book awards, book lists, diverse book finder, which is a great database to use, and then ideas for programming as well. So isn't just all about, finding books with Hispanic kids, or, bilingual books. It's about more than that. And then for the access page, it's kind of a little bit more all over the place, but we have the library has more than 4 walls, which is something that I was inspired by a Knowledge Quest issue. I can't remember the exact year. I want to say 2019, 2020. And that is just kind of about extending access to the library's resources when it's closed. So that could be during winter or summer breaks. It could be in school when you're at lunch or you're not there. How are the students going to get access to the library? I also have some resources for homeschooling, and then I have resources for collaborating with the public library, which is something very near and dear to my heart. So yeah, so it's not just, focused on one thing. It has a very broad range of resources, sort of, like I said, to act as a jumping point, as a first stop on the quest to bridge those gaps in equity.
Alyssa, I
That's
know
fantastic.
And I know you're starting a new job, and I imagine you're going to be using the resources that you gathered in this new position. And I don't know much about the community that you're entering. So do you think the resources that you've gathered, I guess the question, in what ways will you be using this personally? And then also, in what ways will the materials you've gathered serve the total school population? Have you considered those things?
Yeah, so my school is a pretty diverse school, I would say. And I'm going to be the first permanent school librarian there in quite a few years. So I will have the ability to kind of build that program that's kind of been lacking. Since there hasn't been one school librarian dedicated to the school. And I know that the other school librarians have done a fantastic job with what they can do, given that they're only there for 2 or 3 days a week. But I think, I have an advantage of being there 5 days a week. I get to build those relationships with the students and see what their needs are and kind of figuring it out from there. And so because it is a pretty diverse school, I think I'll be able to use the research that I've done in many different ways. So of course, with the representation, I can start by doing a diversity audit on like a little shelf and just see how, a random kind of selection of books are in that library and how they reflect the student population. Students haven't really been able to check out books very often. So I know that's something that's definitely on my list, is making sure that the books that are there are books that will benefit them, and allow them to become readers and have that culture of reading in the school. And then as I grow to know the students, I'll be able to look at, monetary gaps. Are those present in the school, and how so? And how can I, as the school librarian, secure more funding to give these students, what they deserve, and what they need to be good students and successful in what they want to do and reaching their goals. I think I like that you said for the whole school community, because of course it's not just about the students, there's staff too. So how can the library serve the staff when the library is closed? It's, the staff comes in, they might need book recommendations for a unit they're doing. They might need help with researching for some academic program they're doing outside of school. They could be leading their students in a research project and need advice or help in finding those good databases, those good sources for their students. So how can I, as the school librarian, help them help their students? And how can I do that when I'm not there? So I think—
Sounds like there's going to be wonderful opportunities for collaboration and partnership in reading circles, book clubs, all sorts of things. Yeah. Folks excited about some of the materials you'll be pointing to. I did wonder also, because you're in this wonderful moment in your career where you're starting in a place that hasn't had a librarian. So the importance of establishing a baseline to measure your growth would be pretty exciting at this moment. Have you thought about how you might do that?
I haven't really that much about,
That's
establishing
okay.
a baseline for myself, but it's definitely something that I think I should do, that I can do, so that I can build on that and see how far I've come, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I can look at where the library started and see the growth that's happened, what still needs to be grown, what things may have fallen by the wayside that I can then pick up back up and start again.
So your diversity audit is a great start for that baseline, I think.
Yeah.
And
Right.
getting to know who the students are and what they need, and looking at the stuff qualitatively might be kind of fun as well. Especially parents, that the notion of connecting to parents whose backgrounds are different, who may not have been served by the library effectively, as effectively as possible in the past.
Yeah, I think back to school night could be a very good opportunity for that, making those connections with parents and, seeing where their head is at with the library and what, they have experienced, what they haven't, what they would like to see. Maybe even having like a QR code with a survey posted throughout the school, if they don't end up venturing down into the basement where the library is. The library is still, it's everywhere.
I think you have to lure them there. You have to, an idea to do that would be really important.
Yes.
This is so exciting, because Alyssa, you're sort of the embodiment of, Dr. Todd's evidence-based practice. And you're able to do that right from the get-go, where some of us were just in our careers, and then it only later occurred to us, gee, we really have some good evidence here.
Yeah. We're letting it drip through the faucet without capturing the stuff, the beauty that we lost. Yeah.
I can't tell you how often, those of us who had long careers like Dr. V and I and many others, will look back and say, oh, if only we had documented that, whether it was the simplest things from programming and, programming and whatever other cool displays, anything, to obviously measuring the growth in our contribution to student learning, which is our ultimate goal. So such an advantage for you to really be starting right out of the gate with having a really good handle on how to do this kind of evidence collection. It's terrific.
Yeah. And I can say I've learned from the best. So thank you for, dripping that knowledge down into my brain.
Well, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, Alyssa. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about your project?
No, I'm just very excited to see, where the research will go in equity and diversity, and seeing, how has the pandemic affected that? What kind of gaps has that created? And then how can we close them? So I think I'm very much looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Well, we will share your LibGuide as a resource, and any other materials you want to share with us we'll include with this video. And we're very excited about it having been the inaugural episode of our podcast.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here with such amazing, incredible professors, researchers, librarians. Thank you for having me.